This is a special episode of the Backseat Leadership Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Brad Merchant, here with...
My name is Jeff Kokenauer, and if you don't know, the Backseat Leadership Podcast is for leaders who aren't in the front seat of their organizations, and we thought we needed to record a special episode because we wanted to be helpful.
Yep.
Brad, why do we want to be helpful?
Well, we are in the midst of some unprecedented times, don't you think?
Literally unprecedented, not in my lifetime.
Yep, and we are seeing the coronavirus spread like the plague, not only across our country, but all over the world. And that's causing organizations all over the place. But what we want to talk about is maybe specifically churches to make some decisions that they've maybe not even ever thought they'd have to make before.
Yeah.
And that's causing a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles to doing ministry and just doing life together as a church community.
Yeah.
And so we want to talk a little bit about that, some things that we think that might be helpful for church leaders that might be listening to this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, to start, I mean, so you and I are in a state that is not quarantined, but we are in restrictions. So you can't be in groups of larger than 250. You got to social distance and all that stuff.
Right.
And so that proves difficult for churches that are larger than that. And they don't necessarily mega churches. These are just churches who have gatherings larger than 250.
Yep.
And how do they gather their people together? And so the reality is that for some churches, that's an easy call, because they've been stepping into the streaming world for a while, things like that. But for a lot of churches, that's going to be a difficult thing. And so, in this, I think one of the keys, before we talk about practical things, one of the huge things that we could talk about when it comes to being a backseat leader in a church that's trying to think through these things, the first thing is that you can be a champion. You can be a person who can come in and help think through those things, help think about different ideas. There are so many ways that we can now gather without being together, that it's going to be easy for a lot of people to have a whole bunch of ideas. You can be a person as a backseat leader to instill hope into a conversation that seems to have a lot of hysteria. I mean, there's hysteria, and then there's hysteria about the hysteria. It feels like there's just craziness going on.
There is.
And you can be someone who can instill hope and say, hold on, we can figure this out. And I think that's a critical role of a backseat leader in this situation, especially in churches right now who are trying to figure out what in the world do we do to gather together.
You're right.
So I just want to emphasize that at the top of this little conversation to say, hey, there's lots of ways that you can do this. You can be a person, first of all, that instills hope.
That's right. Yep. A verse that's come back to my mind multiple times is Psalm 112, verse 7. He is not afraid of bad news, talking about the righteous man. He's not afraid of bad news. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. And I think that's a good word for all of us, anyone who's listening to this podcast, certainly, but especially church leaders in particular, because it's really easy to panic, and panic spreads faster than the coronavirus.
It sure does.
And so we need to be really careful that we are not creating, as you said, hysteria that does not need to be in existence.
Yeah.
However, we also don't want to fall in the other ditch, which I think we've seen people do, especially now, where people almost self-righteously begin to condemn others for making decisions that they think is a result of being panicked. And I don't think that's fair either. I think there needs to be a line drawn in the sand where we say, hey, we're not going to panic, but that doesn't mean we're going to judge others for decisions that they're making in their church context.
That's right.
And say that they're panicking.
That's right.
That the decisions we're making in every church context is going to look different, because we have to contextualize all of our decisions.
Right.
It's part of being a good leader in a good church.
That's right. And I think that what you say there is so incredibly important, because you can have a position on this thing, but it doesn't mean you have to berate someone else's position to prove yours is correct or better or more superior. This is unprecedented, the way that this is going down.
Nobody planned for this.
Nobody sat in a room and said, here's how we're going to plan for the coronavirus in 2 years.
In your education, did you take any classes on how to deal with things like this?
Never did we sit in, here's the epidemic and pandemic class today, right?
Nope.
Never did.
Nope.
And there hasn't been a workshop on it yet. So it'd be great
or
if
a big conference or anything. Yeah, because we can't have big conferences.
We can't right now, so we can't even talk about it.
So Jeff, let me ask you. I mean, what are some things that you would recommend? Maybe if there's a church leader listening to this who's thinking, "Wow, we either already have shut down our services for Sunday, or, wow, we might have to shut down our services for a Sunday.
Or multiple Sundays.
Multiple,
Right.
which might be the case.
Might be the case.
What recommendations do you have to them, advice that you'd give to them for how to do ministry now when you can't see someone face-to-face physically?
Yeah.
I mean, what recommendations or tools would you recommend?
Yeah, and you know, I think for me, I was sit as a youth pastor, right? And actually, as we're sitting right now, I've just gotten a couple texts about what are you doing for youth group in the midst of all this. We don't have more than 250 kids in our youth group, but gathering the whole church together on a Wednesday night, that happens.
Right.
And as a youth pastor, we use all kinds of different tools already. You know, Instagram is the way that we usually connect with students online. Facebook is a way that we connect with parents online. Twitter is a place that I connect with my friends online. And so there's lots of tools that you can use. Primarily when it comes to churches, especially who are trying to figure out, okay, how do we go online?
Yep.
Facebook Live is probably the easiest way to do it.
Easy.
So many people are already there.
Yep.
And if you have a phone, an iPad, listen, nobody's expecting you to have the highest quality streaming.
Quality doesn't matter right now.
It doesn't right now.
Yep.
Celebrating together, reminding each other in the midst of this, the goodness and faithfulness of our God. Just being together is a great way. You can utilize YouTube clips, YouTube worship stuff. You know, so if you want to put together a digital worship service, and maybe you don't have the means to gather your worship leaders together, put together a couple videos or links. Here, do this and then do this. Like almost put together a digital plan for a worship service, and then do a Facebook Live of your pastor or your communicator teaching and communicating, preaching the word.
Yeah.
I think that's one. When it comes to like gathering groups together, because I think this is the critical part, right? Because a major experience, if not a primary experience of gathering the church together, is being together.
Right.
Is sharing in our struggles, the fact that we can't find toilet paper anywhere except for Lowe's, you know, like all of these things.
It's $100 a roll.
And you found Purell in a mission trip bag, and you said, I'm going to sell it for $1 million.
Absolutely.
And then you retire on your island you purchased. The reality is that that's a primary thing. And so, you know, how do we do that? I think one of the easiest ways, Google Hangouts is one easy way. You can just jump on.
Totally free.
Yeah, it's totally free. You just have, you put a Google account in and you go, and it's not hard to sign up for. If you've got iPhones, you can do group FaceTime calls and things like this, so you can get your small group together and have those conversations. And so I think those are easy ways. You can set up Facebook groups. You can set up text messaging groups. These are things that the youth ministry world has been doing it for a while. Youth ministry world, the tribe has been doing for a while. And it's easy to do now. GroupMe as a group messaging app that you can jump on and start using. There's another app called Discord that has some of the same kind of ideas. You can set up your church in such a way that there's all these things that are in there. And that's usually for gamers, actually. It's a gaming text messaging group thing. But I think I would recommend the Google Hangouts. If you've got a bunch of people on iPhones, you can do FaceTime, that kind of stuff. But utilize those things to gather your people together.
For sure.
And so I think that's the large, preaching, the large group, the small group stuff. And then when it comes to actually caring for your people, there's lots of ways to do it. And I think social media is probably the way to engage, right? Whether it's through Facebook or Instagram or even email, just actually asking questions in the email. A lot of times our promotion and our use of communication is to tell people stuff.
Yep.
Guys like Dave Adamson, who's down at North Point Church, who's the online pastor down there, does a phenomenal job of engagement and how to engage the congregation online. And this is a critical time for the church to really ask the question, okay, how do we get creative with this? How do we utilize the things that we have in place to engage our people and in the people in the community? So asking questions, how can we pray for you? What's going on with you? And then the other part of that is by engaging that way and helping to do that, like you involve yourself in their world. This is where they're all at. Thursday afternoon was from like 3:30 to 4 o'clock was one of the quickest hours of news I think I've ever seen, especially like in the sports world when everything was getting canceled.
Yep.
That's where people are at right now. And you can instill hope as a church into that conversation and into that community to help people move from where they're at, whether they're in the hysterics or whatever, they're just trying to figure this thing out, back to somewhat of a normal life, and help them live the life out that they've been called to live, regardless of what's going on around them, to live in the hope that they have in Jesus. I think that's critical.
Yep, for sure. I think in times like this, you know what's more important than anything? It's not new information. It's being reminded of things that we are tempted to forget when we're drowning in panic.
That's right.
And C.S. Lewis, back in 1948, when this was, everybody's freaking out because the atomic bomb was invented earlier, and this thing could be dropped on us at any moment in time. And C.S. Lewis wrote this. Now, I'm going to self-edit as I'm reading, because I think what Lewis said then about the atomic bomb, if he was still alive, he'd probably say the same thing about the coronavirus. And here's what he said. He said, if we are all going to be destroyed by the coronavirus, let that virus, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep thinking about the virus. And then I love this line. The virus may break our bodies, but it needs not dominate our minds.
So good.
It's not a good word.
It's so good.
And so if you're a church leader, you don't need to feel the pressure to be an expert on disease control or the coronavirus. You know what you're an expert at? You're an expert at what the Apostle Paul told the Philippian church. He said, listen, what I'm going to tell you again is really no trouble to me, but useful for you. People need to be reminded, your people need to be reminded that God is in control and that a coronavirus may take your body, but it can't take your soul.
So good.
And it's things like that you need to be reminded of, because if you're a church leader, you feel the pressure of having everything figured out.
That's right.
And I just want to tell you, even the experts on this thing don't have everything figured out.
Sure.
So instead, we need to be in the business of the ministry of reminding people things that they're tempted to forget when they're drowning in panic. So I would encourage you, just as Jeff, you've already mentioned, to maybe set up, maybe it's a Facebook Live thing, maybe it's a Google Hangout, whatever it is. I really like Facebook Live. It's really easy, and people are, like you said, people are already on that platform. And maybe it's just, hey, once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever the cadence might be, I'm going to give a short devotional, and I want to remind people of this truth.
That's right.
Whatever the truth might be. And people will be thankful for that, because right now they're bombarded by new information and panic all the time. And to have that steady stream of voice saying, hey, don't you forget, don't you forget, don't you forget, and telling us things that we are tempted to forget, is really helpful. And I think that just relieves the pressure from us feeling like we have to have everything figured out. Another medium that I would maybe add to what you've already mentioned is the use of writing. Blogs are all over the place, and maybe your church already has a blog, but maybe it doesn't. And this would be a great time to start one.
That's right.
I remember a friend of mine once said, writing is clear thinking made visible. And people need clear thinking.
That's
and
really
if you're able to pen that to paper and give it to your people in the form of a blog post, say, hey, read this article, people will read it, and it could be helpful to them in helping people be reminded of truths that they can tend to forget.
I think in this too, like, engagement is the critical cog here, right? So if you're gonna do Facebook, get on there, do a Facebook Live, and engage with the people as they comment, or engage with the people as they communicate with you, and just make sure that you're actually utilizing it in the way that it's intended to be used. Like, don't just get on there and well, here we're gonna preach this message, ignore the people who are communicating with us. Engage them, and the last part I think too is learn from other people, right? Because here's the deal. We gave you some simple, and I think you should keep it simple. Keep it simple. Pick the one thing, or the 2 or 3 things you're going to do to engage your congregation and get creative right now. But the second part is learn from other people who are doing it. There are plenty of people right now pushing content and pushing ideas for how to engage this this situation, this event, honestly.
Yep.
And so learn from them and balance I've got to create what's good for us versus what's already out there that you can learn from.
Totally.
And you don't have to be, if you're the medium-sized church that's just trying to figure out how to engage your people and keep them safe, you don't have to do everything that the 5,000 person church down the street's doing.
Contextualize.
Yeah, do what works for you and realize that you just need to be you. Your congregation and you just need to lead as you are.
That's right.
And then give yourself grace. Screw it up. It's going to be okay.
That's
it's going
right.
to be okay.
That's
But
right.
we can do this. The church we have just as many tools as we've had at our hands, at our fingertips before. Now we're being forced to utilize them. And I think that's a good thing for the church. I think the kingdom will be built up because of it. And the question is are we going to press in and engage in it?
That's right. That's right.
Brad, we just wanted to get on and have a quick conversation, and I feel like, hopefully it's helpful. We just want to be helpful to people.
For sure. Well, Jeff, thanks for taking the time, and let's keep praying that the Lord would vanquish this disease, this virus that's going around,
right.
and that in the meantime we would be people that do not panic, but remind people of things they tend to forget and use different platforms that maybe we thought, we've never thought we'd use this before, but now we will.
That's right.
And maybe we'll keep using it in the future.
That's right. It's really good.
Thanks for the episode.
Yep. Everybody have a great weekend. Be safe, and we'll see you at our next episode of the Backseat Leadership Podcast.